Hello, good evening everybody, and welcome to this, the fifth in our Calf Crop 2021 series. This meeting has been brought to you by SEC Consulting, Livestock Team and SRUC Vets together. It's been funded through the University's Innovation Fund. Calf Crop 2021, many of you have been to previous webinars, but just a brief whistle-stop tour through the purpose of it. We're trying to get key research messages out to farmers, so out from the academic institutes and out to where they really matter. With that, we're looking to improve overall suckler cow performance, produce more calves, and ultimately make more money. So the format for this year has changed. Normally we would be in a hotel or a farm environment and do everything in one day, but we're now on to webinars, and we're more able to reflect the production cycle of the throughout the year. We're on to webinar number 5, and that's calf health management. The team is as it has been before. We've got Tim, Alwyn, Karen and myself, and we're also joined today by our guest speaker, who is Katrina Henderson, who works as a VIO for SRUC Vet Services in Dumfries. So welcome to Katrina. Tonight, looking at calf health management, we have Tim Geraghty, who's going to cover young calf disease, and then later on, Katrina will cover pneumonia and scours pre-turnout. So Katrina does a lot of work with dairy guys in the southwest, and obviously has a strong interest in pneumonia and scours. So we brought her into the team, which is great. The thing that's really important is this is your meeting, and we've had an amazing number of questions over the last few webinars. Really encourage you to ask the questions. It makes a big difference, and we've got plenty of time at the end of the meeting tonight for a bit of a question and answer session. So if you do have questions relating to this topic or even other things we've covered, do feel free to file them into the questions, and we'll see what we can do at the end. So with that, that's really all from me, a whistle-stop tour from me, and just basically I'd like to hand over to Tim.
Thank you, Robert. I'll just take a second here and get the right screen on, hopefully. Great. Is that looking correct?
Yeah, fine. Yep. Thanks.
Brilliant. Okay. Magic. Thank you. So yeah, we're moving in through a little series into young calf disease, and I'm just going to try and speak to sort of, I suppose, really preventative principles of young calf disease. I'm going to talk through an example in a housed system, but the principles really apply, regardless if we're indoor or outdoor calving. So I hope there's something useful here, and then looking forward to Katrina's talk, which probably has more technical detail in it, and then particularly to the questions, as Robert has said. So please keep them coming in. Here we go. Usual targets. We've sort of shown this slide each evening. We're investing in our pregnant cattle. They are busy eating money, and we are hoping to see a return on that investment over this season. And we've given our cows 2 targets in order to see that money come back to us. The first is to wean a big calf, and by big we mean rapidly growing. So wean a rapidly growing calf. And the second one, of course, is to get back in calf quickly. So we're sort of keeping our mind on those 2 seasonal targets to get that money back in. And tonight we are focusing on 2 challenges to the rapidly growing calf part. So it's young calf diseases, split into, obviously the 2 by far the most common ones, scour and pneumonia during the first weeks of life, which for many of us, but not all of us, will be in the inside pre-turnout, depending exactly how our system works. As I said, I'm not going to go into lots and lots of detail, and my silly little graph here, I hope it makes sense, but basically we can think of the pathogens that cause scour. So I've got crypto and coxsackie and coronavirus and rotavirus and E. coli, all these different bugs that cause calf scour. They basically live in poo. They come from poo, and that's how they spread. So I'm just lumping them all together and thinking of bugs that work and live in poo and cause scour. And then the bugs that cause pneumonia. So here we have all the really common causes of pneumonia in cattle. And in my simple model, well, they just live in, I've said air here. That's not quite correct. It's their respiratory droplets. They spread through the air in little bits of snot and saliva and coughing and spluttering, and they move like that. So I'm lumping them all together, the causes of scour and poo and the causes of pneumonia in the air, to help us think through some principles. And the most important principle when we think about, well, how does an outbreak happen and how do we stop an outbreak of this disease happening, is this model here. So it's supposed to represent a tipping scales where it could go to the left or it can go to the right. And the thing that we're balancing is, on one side of the scale, we see the animal's health status and the animal's immune system in particular, so its ability to fight these infections when it meets them. And on the other side of the scale is basically the volume of bugs that the immune system has to meet. So, you know, the more bugs we pile in there, and as it increases and increases, we start to tip the scales towards disease. So the concept would be, and it is correct for these sort of endemic problems which are present in every farm and present almost in every shed, these infectious agents, if the immune system's in good order and if the infectious load is low, then the scales will tip in the animal's favour and we'll have health, which eventually translate to rapid growth. But if the immune system's not really in tip-top condition and it's a bit light and the challenge gets too big, so too many of these bugs accumulate, then the scales tip into disease, and that's when we lose our growth rate. We start having to treatments and gut wall damage and lung damage and problems. So it's that tipping scale between these two things. And of course, what our intention is before we start calving, or in the early stages of calving, we want to keep these scales tilted towards health, if at all possible. So we'll drill in now on the immune system. And at the danger of oversimplifying it, because there are some other things that are important, but fundamentally in the first weeks of life, the immune system's about colostrum. And we looked at that in depth on Thursday, that this young calf that's just hit the straw here has no specific immunity to any of those pathogens we've just looked at. No specific immunity, and it can only get that specific immunity from colostrum, and this clock is ticking. As soon as it hits the ground, the clock's ticking. We've just got a few hours really to make sure that the colostrum goes into the calf and the immune system is bolstered. Nutrition's important as well. So after colostrum, how much milk the calf's got access to, that has an important role in immunity. Physiological stress, so if it's standing in a gale or it's standing in a cold and a wet environment, then that's important too. But for simplicity's sake, let's really focus on colostrum as the major predictor of calf immunity in these first weeks. I've got another graph. My apologies. I probably have too many graphs, and I promise this is the last one tonight, so that no more graphs after this. But this graph is showing something different. It's from that excellent paper from Edinburgh Vet School, Bragg et al., PVM, and what we're looking at here is not individual calf immunity, but the percentage of calves in these 90 odd different farms, the percentage of calves that don't have good enough colostrum. They've got poor colostrum uptake and therefore their immune system is weak. Okay, and we see this long range. There's a big range. These are beef units in Scotland and in England and recently done. So it's up to date and it's accurate. And we're looking at the proportion of calves that have not had enough colostrum. So on these farms, whatever there are, maybe 20 odd, on this side of the graph, we can see almost all the calves have enough colostrum. There's maybe 1 in 10 that don't quite get enough, maybe slightly more of that over here, but there's certainly very few calves that don't have enough colostrum. And then on this side of the graph is the sort of scary side. If we imagine that tipping scale, we're seeing lots of calves that don't have enough colostrum. In fact, on the far side of the graph, we're seeing more than half the calves in the shed didn't get enough colostrum, and therefore their immune system is not in good shape. So that's a powerful image to study and think, well, you know, for those of you that maybe are calving now, where are you right now? If you look at your calves in the shed, what percentage of them have got good colostrum uptake? What percentage of them have poor colostrum uptake. And of course, our intention, if we can do anything to do it, our intention is to be on this side of the graph. We want almost all the calves having high colostrum uptake to keep our group in good shape. And I want to now just go through a sort of a stylized example to illustrate the principles, and we'll come back and think about group level colostrum uptake as part of that example. So this is an empty shed. This is the shed before we've put anything into it, and no cattle in yet. And the point with the bugs that cause scour is that if there's poo in there, if there's dung in that shed, then the bugs that cause scour will probably be in that shed as well, even before we've put any cattle in. So that, you know, dirt and grime and dung that's not been effectively removed, then the bugs are going to be there. And crypto is the one to think about there, because it's really long-lived, hard little shell, survives very long times, especially if it's in organic matter, which is basically dung. So it's already there. So if the walls are dirty, then these bugs are there before we start. If there's, you know, bedding that hasn't been cleaned out, then the bugs are certainly there. So before we put anything in the shed, we may already have a challenge from these infectious agents. And that's where Alwyn talked to pressure washing, talked to steam cleaning even better. We discussed some disinfectants. I'm sure we'll come back to that again. Remembering that the disinfectant's only going to work if the organic matter is gone, if the dung's gone. So the cleanliness of the shed before we start is really important, particularly for these scour-causing bugs, before we even put stock in the building. Now we're going to stock the shed with our pre-calving cows. So they're in. And of course, what they start doing is they start producing poo and dung. And so they're dunging in. And so even if we had a really clean shed to start with, once the cows are in, these bugs that cause scour are carried by the cattle, the adult cattle. They're not causing disease in the adult cattle. The adult cattle have perfectly fine immunity, but they're contaminating the environment with, you know, low numbers, moderate numbers of these bugs which cause scour. And those same adult cattle are also breeding, hopefully, and they're coughing about, and, you know, not unhealthy. They've just got some snotters and some slevers, and if we go and swab them, then we'll find, you know, with maybe one or two exceptions, we'll find these bugs on those adult cattle. So the bugs that cause pneumonia, the airborne bugs, are now in the shed, coming from the adult cows as they breathe in their normal environment. And this is perfectly normal. We can't get rid of these bugs. They're going to be there with the cattle. But we can now start thinking about the shed and say, okay, well, you know, the way we manage that shed, particularly about stocking density, if we put a lot in there, we're going to ramp up the number of poo bugs and ramp up the number of air bugs. But now let's also think about ventilation, because if fresh air is coming in, you know, well ventilated shed, these bugs just go straight out again, don't they? The fresh air blows them out. But if we're in a poorly ventilated shed, then it's not as simple as that, and the bugs start to increase. So the way we manage the shed and exactly how the shed is designed, now that it's stocked, we might start increasing the number of bugs. And now our calves have arrived. So here's our little baby calves, the firstborn, the oldest calves, coming into the cleanest shed, you know, the cleanest part in our calving window. And what do the calves do? Well, they start doing the same game, don't they? They start dunging into the straw, and they start breathing, and they meet these infectious agents, hopefully with strong immunity and hopefully not too big an infectious challenge, so that they go over it. But they start producing bits as well, and stocking density is going up, and our shed is a little bit more contaminated with these older calves. And it could be, hopefully with good immunity, it could be that that's it. The calves are meeting the bugs as they should. They are getting over it very quickly. There's no check to growth rate. There's no ill health. And the green clouds here around the calves is the colostrum. They're pumped full of colostrum. We're on the left side of the graph. All these calves have good colostrum, and we're in a healthy, happy situation, normal. And what I want to do, just for interest, let's imagine we're at the other side of that graph, and actually, it's not so good. 2 of these calves out of 3 don't have good colostrum. One's got moderate and one's got poor colostrum, and they're being exposed to all these bugs. So this calf here, the red calf, he's in trouble now because his colostrum's not right, and he's going to get sick. So he gets a scour, early born calf with a scour, no problem. You know, treatment, we'll zoom into that in a second. And he, you know, recovering quite well, responds quickly to treatment. But in the meantime, he does this. he's a multiplier, which is a real problem. We had a nice talk, veterinary talk last week, looking at crypto, and they were reminding us that this calf can ingest 10 oocysts, 10 crypto eggs, and shed out over 1 billion in the course of its illness, you know, a scour for a few days. So this sick calf that didn't quite get enough colostrum and got the infection, and he is now really doing some damage around the environment. He's a major multiplier into this shed, and of course we know what happens next. The calf recovers, the shed's contaminated, and then the newborn calf lands right into the middle of it. And this is now a really dangerous situation. If we picture our scales again, this calf's landed in, vulnerable, no immunity yet, hasn't had his colostrum, and the level of challenge is really substantial. So it's moving away from us. It's getting harder and harder to keep the scales tilted the way we want. And even with good colostrum now, the level of challenge is so high that you know that the risk is we'll tip towards disease. So that's my last slide. That's kind of it. I know it's a simplified story and maybe too simple, but the principles are right. You know, these infectious diseases are very difficult to manage, but the principles were kind of illustrated there are roughly right. So we can pick out some key messages. What's the building like before we go in, particularly with the scour causing agents? Is it clean? Is it even cleanable? Because that's a problem. You know, old stone byres are very, very difficult to get them clean. And how's the ventilation? Is it an airy shed? Is it naturally ventilated in wind? Is it good? Is there decent ventilation when there's no wind? Stack ventilation, etc., is important. How are we managing it? How often are we bedding it? What's the stocking density like? Are we helping keep the infectious rate down, or is our management allowing it to build up? Presence of older calves, you know, adding more and more bugs. And then the last thing, really importantly, where's the immunity of the calves at? And not just the individual, that's really important, but the group. What proportion of the calves born so far have strong immunity and therefore are not as likely to act as these multiplier calves, which can kick off a major outbreak. So that's me. I will pass to Katrina, who will pick up and zoom in more technical detail to dealing with an outbreak, but hopefully that was helpful.
Thanks very much, Tim. That's great. Hopefully everyone can see my screen and hear me there. Is that all right?
Yep, we can see you fine.
Yep, perfect, great. So really, I want to focus on tonight. A lot of the talks so far have been about how we stop things going wrong and how we try and prevent problems. But being realistic, we're going to get situations and we're going to get years where there are problems. So really what I want to talk about tonight is what happens and what do we do when we get those problems. So really 4 parts to that. 1, we treat the individual animal. 2, and I think this is really important, we look at measures to reduce the ongoing challenge, because as Tim's talked about, it can really ramp up in the course of an outbreak. We can diagnose what the problem is, and that allows us to have a plan for next year as well. And that's really one of the best and the most productive things you can do in the face of an outbreak is kind of look at why it's happened, what's happened, and how we can stop it next year. So looking first at Scour, in terms of kind of what is it going to be, I guess, at different ages, and actually we can make a fairly educated guess sometimes depending on the age of the animal. So really, if it's in the first week, it's less likely to be things like crypto, rotavirus, coronavirus, and it's more likely to be a bacterial scour, so an E. coli, K99, or a salmonella. Salmonella is certainly, you know, much less common in beef herds than dairy herds, but it does happen. Weeks 2 and 3 is predominantly Cryptosporidia and rotavirus, coronavirus. Again, Salmonella doesn't discriminate in the same way for age. And really 4 weeks and above, you're looking at coccidiosis and Salmonella. But we're going to focus primarily on kind of weeks 0 to 3, because that will probably be where the majority of the scour problems come in. So what do we do about treatment? It's certainly worth having your vet involved kind of right from the get-go, and even before, in terms of having this is part of your health plan. You know, what are we going to do if we get calves with Scour? It will slightly depend on cause, and that obviously things like cryptosporidia and coccidiosis will require a different treatment to your bacterial. And I think it's important just to focus on the fact that our priorities for treatment are really to keep them alive and to keep them growing. So it will take a while for scours to stop, and how quickly they will stop will depend slightly on the cause as well. So it's probably about not fixating on how long they're scouring for and how bad the scour looks for, but actually if they're alive, if they're hydrated and they're growing, then the gut damage means that it can take a while for scours to stop. So in terms of our treatment priorities, really, we can kill the infectious agent, and that's fine. But actually, what a lot of these calves die of is dehydration, and is acidosis. And basically, that means that they lose alkaline elements out in the diarrhea, so they can become acidic. So we need to rehydrate them. Sometimes, if they're not too dehydrated, and depending on kind of what the cause of the scour is, rehydrating them lets the kidneys sort the acidosis. So if you can get their fluid balance back, you don't need to correct that. But in beef calves older than about 7 days of age, sometimes you can get acidosis, and that really just reflects that you don't tend to get it so much with the bacterial causes, you get it more with the viral causes. And calves with acidosis, they're wobbly, so it almost looks like it's something wrong with their brain rather than a diarrhea. They won't get up. They sometimes don't respond, and they're slow to respond to any touch. They're quite sluggish. One of the things that you can do, and your vet will do if they're looking at a calf, is to look at actually what's the fluid deficit. How dehydrated is this calf? So less than 5% in a beef calf, you're probably not likely to notice because they're just thirstier. Between 5 and 7% is when you start to see them. So they've got a bit of a cold nose. If you pinch their skin, it stays up and it doesn't snap back. And they've got a very slightly sunken eye. Kind of above 7, below 10%, they have quite a markedly sunken eye. Extremities can be cold, and they're quite often wobbly, weak, or collapsed. And above 10%, really, you're in a bit of trouble there. Do we use IV fluids? Is it worth calling the vet out to get an IV drip? I think it's certainly worth a discussion, if you're making this decision. But certainly if you have calves that have visibly sunken eyes, if they're not willing to get up, and if they've not got a good suck reflex, then really those are all reasons for using IV fluids. Oral, you can certainly use if they're still reasonably bright and they're drinking. I would certainly initiate these as soon as the scour starts, so don't let them get to a stage of becoming dehydrated before you do this. Give them little and often, and keep going with milk feeding. If they're not drinking from the dam, then feed them, because it will keep them growing. It feeds the gut lining, and it actually helps the guts to heal, and it improves your kidney function, so it helps the kidneys sort out your electrolytes as well. Sometimes it makes them scour more. Obviously, if you're not putting anything in, you're not getting anything out, but it doesn't necessarily mean that's a good thing. So I would take the scour and keep feeding them and keep them rehydrated. There's 4 types of oral fluid therapy, and the first ones are basically just to correct the dehydration. So that would be things like your Lectade. Second generation can go some way towards correcting acidosis as well. So it's worth thinking about that if you've got calves in the kind of the risky age, or you think they're looking a bit wobbly. Third generation would provide energy, and that would be things like Energide. And fourth generation has compounds in it to help the intestine repair and regenerate as well. Antibiotics in calf scour can be reasonably controversial, and again, I would encourage you to have a chat with your vet practice about views on that, because they will know your farm and the risk factors and you know what it's likely to be. But most cases of calf scour will be viral, they will be cryptosporidia, or they'll be coccidiosis. So it's worth bearing in mind that it's not necessarily always bacterial. There is an argument that when cryptosporidia, when rotavirus come in, that it actually disturbs the whole balance of the intestine and you can get bacterial overgrowth. Always bear in mind and particularly with gut pathogens and things like E. coli, that there is a very real risk of resistance. It's worth bearing in mind that if you have a colostrum deficiency as well, then you're more likely to have bacteria in the bloodstream. And actually 30% of calves that are not just scouring but are sick with it have bacteria in their bloodstream. And the levels of that are higher if they have low blood antibody levels, and more likely if they're less than 5 days of age. So I would say certainly, you know, responsible use of antibiotics if there are systemic signs of illness, so it's not just a diarrhea and a bright calf. If you know that in your herd you're having issues with colostrum management, or you're worried that that particular calf hasn't had enough colostrum. If they're less than 5 days of age, and if you know you have salmonella in the herd, then I think all of those are certainly justifications for antibiotic use. So what does treatment success look like? Certainly mortality is an important one, looking at the growth rates of affected versus unaffected calves. So actually, how well have we kept them going through that? And certainly, you know, there's evidence for some of the pathogens like crypto that if you have calves on a good plane of nutrition, that they cope with the crypto and they cope with the scour much better than calves that haven't been fed well throughout it. We talked a little bit about the duration and the severity of the diarrhea perhaps being less reliable indicators of success, of treatment success than other areas. So part of what we need to do as well is limit and stop the exposure of calves to the infectious agent. So Tim talked a little bit about the fact that the infectious agent is coming from a variety of sources. So adult cows, older calves, particularly diarrheic calves and recovered calves, and also the environment. So what you tend to find is that the first few calves in a calving period tend to escape disease, but they contaminate the environment for the other calves. And they've looked at that really nicely and found that calves born in the second half of a 12-week calving period were 8 times more likely than those born in the first half. So that really reflects the buildup of infection and the spread of ages of these calves. Infection can survive in the environment, and how long and how well will depend on the environment. So some things like salmonella really likes a kind of warm, wet environment. And some organisms like crypto will survive very well, and they also require special disinfectants. So something like Killcox, a lot of your kind of routine run-of-the-mills won't kill crypto. So how do we deal with this? How do we separate these calves in the face of an outbreak? This is one way to do it, and it's not often done. And this was kind of pioneered in North America, and it's not often done in its purest form over here. But certainly the principles still stand, and there are folk doing adapted systems of this. So it was kind of based on a big 800-900 cow suckler herd that was having huge problems with scour, about 15% mortality associated with it. And what they did was they just moved their calving pasture. So that was calving pasture week 1 and 2, moved it and moved it again. And what they found was that calf mortality decreased to almost nothing, and their vet spend decreased by about £3,000 over a calving season. So it was really effective. And it wasn't specific for any bacteria or virus. It just worked on separating the calves from a high level of challenge. And it had impressive results just through reducing the age spread. So it's worth thinking about how this can work on your farm. Now, some folk will do that, that as a matter of routine, that kind of halfway through the calving period, you move to somewhere else. And some people will just have it in the back of their mind that actually if a scour outbreak starts, here's what I'm going to do to get the next calves born away from it. So it's just worth having a think about it, because it's certainly one of the most effective ways to reduce the calves from the challenge, and to hopefully reduce mortality in the end of the calving period. I think it's also important for thinking about things like Johne's control as well, and that sometimes when we drill down into herds that are keeping throwing up positives, quite often they're calves that are born in the tail end of the calving period as well. So for things like that, it's worth thinking about as well. In terms of diagnosis, you can do it by fecal sample. There are some more unusual causes of scour that you need a post-mortem for. So you know, if you've got a dead calf, it's really worth making use of it, or a moribund one. Check colostrum absorption, and that can be done just by blood sampling. Don't blood sample the calves that are dehydrated, because they will tend to have the antibodies will concentrate, so it will look better than it is. So really you want to do healthy calves in that cohort. And just think about, it's not just what's there, but it's why is it causing disease. It's what's shifted that balance in the other way. So we'll run quickly through pneumonia, and I think one of the important things is early detection of pneumonia, because if you're picking this up early, you get an increased likelihood of treatment success, reduce recurrence, you reduce things like this picture on the right, which is a horrible chronic pneumonia that really no antibiotic is ever going to penetrate. You limit lung damage and hopefully limit effects on growth as well, and also reduce the challenge to other calves. And in the dairy industry at the moment, there's a huge amount of work going on in early detection of disease. I appreciate that it's fully more difficult in beef herds, because you don't really have a handle on what they're drinking, and you know, you can't have your hands on them as often as you can a dairy calf in terms of scoring systems and things like that. But one of the things that we find useful is even just taking a cup of tea into the shed and just sitting. So you're observing them when you're not kind of redding them up and handling them, and actually you can pick out quite a lot there. So it's worth detecting quickly, and once you've detected it, it is worth treating quickly. One of the things I think it's important to think about is actually what can you expect from treatment. So there's a review that reviewed a lot of studies, and they found that 82% of calves have a positive response to the first treatment. So they cure and they don't need another treatment, essentially. About 15% needed a second treatment, so 3% died despite first treatment. 12% of those needed a third treatment, and actually once you get to the third treatment, the odds aren't great. So 38% of treatments at that stage are successful. 32% became really chronic, sort of what we call respiratory cripples, so that they're just not going to come to anything. And 30% died. One of the things that we did with a herd, it was a dairy herd, so these are beef cross calves out the dairy herd, but we got involved really in because of poor growth rates and high rates of pneumonia. And we looked at what was happening to the calves depending on how many treatments they needed. And actually, mortality of calves that needed one treatment was only 1%, so it's pretty good. And 2 treatments was 5%, so not too bad. 3 treatments, 43% of those died, and 4 treatments plus 50% of those died. So I think actually at that stage there is a conversation to be had about when you stop treating these animals. One of the things we looked at as well is actually what happened to these calves. So was it just the mortality rates that were the issue, or actually were there bigger problems? And certainly this was a herd that was having problems with growth rates anyway. I think overall they were about 0.65 kilograms a day, but there was a huge range in that between ones that were 0.1 kilograms a day and ones that were 1 kilogram a day. And a lot of that could be put down to pneumonia. So 1 treatment, they were 0.56 kilograms a day, 2, 0.48 kilograms a day, 3, 0.44, and actually by the time you were over 4 treatments, these guys pre-weaning were only averaging 0.26 kilograms a day. So that's going to take you a long time to get that away fat. In suckler herds, it's certainly been looked at, and pneumonia will have a reduction in growth rates of up to 0.3 kilograms a day. And that's, that's an overall, that's not particularly taking into account repeat treatments. That data is not really available for beef herds at the moment. It has been looked in beef herds in terms of actually when do you stop making money from these calves? When do they cost more to rear for you to rear because of poor growth rates and treatment costs? And actually between 2 and 3 treatments is the break-even point. So I think it's just worth having in mind those figures as well, because these chronic calves are acting as a source of infection, as well as kind of taking up space in the shed for a long time. What do we treat them with? I'm not going to give you kind of one antibiotic that will cure every case, because it will depend a lot on kind of why you're treating them. Are these really sick? Do they look bacterial, or does it look like a bit of a cough and you just need a bit of cover to make sure you're not going to get a secondary bacterial infection? So again, that's one to discuss with your vet practice, but it's worth thinking about how long do you need this cover for? Do you have a herd that has problems with relapsing? So actually, do you need a bit more cover than the shorter acting one? Worth bearing in mind that some of these treatments are critically important antibiotics, so they should really only be used if the lower classes of antibiotic are not effective. Antibiotic sensitivities, and we'll talk a little bit about that in a moment. Withdrawal, not such an issue in pre-weaned calves, but certainly in weaned calves worth thinking about, and route of administration as well, more with weaned calves and intramuscular injections. And there's a human safety element to some of these as well. Certainly worth giving a non-steroidal, so that would be your anti-inflammatories. Welfare, because pneumonia can be an incredibly painful condition. It's been shown to up your average daily live weight gain in the face of a pneumonia outbreak by about 0.2 kilograms a day, so it is worth it from that point of view. Calves treated with a non-steroidal tend to have fewer lung lesions at slaughter or post-mortem, and it reduces the fever, so it makes them feel a bit better. It tends to increase appetite as well. This is something that we looked at. So these are our Pasteurella species. So Pasteurellaceae, Maximise, those kind of bacterial species that are involved in pneumonias. And these are their antibiotic sensitivities. The blue bars are the percentage of the antibiotics that's sensitive. So you'll see actually in these isolates, antibiotic sensitivities is not a huge problem. Now, just because it's sensitive in the lab doesn't necessarily mean it will get into the lung in the calf. You'll see the picture of the chronic calf I showed you before, and really nothing's penetrating that, even if it is sensitive in the lab. But even things like your oxytetracycline, so your older antibiotics, more than 80% of isolates are sensitive to those. In terms of assessing treatment success, success rate to first treatment, recurrence rates, I think are quite important in informing your choice of treatment going forwards. Mortality rate and growth rates as well, because growth rates will give you an idea of how many are going undetected and how many are recurring but not obviously, and how many are grumbling on. In terms of diagnosis, you can get your vet out to take swabs or blood samples. You can do what's called a bowel wash, which is just putting fluid down the nose and soaking it back out again. Or again, post-mortem exam will give you a really good idea, because it tells you not only what's there, but how significant it is, and will hopefully allow you to plan for vaccination and treatment for the following year. So that's me, and I'll hand back to Robert.
Excellent. Thank you very much, Katrina. That was excellent, and 10 out of 10 to everyone for timekeeping. So we've got a pile of questions come in, so if I can just ask the panel to put their cameras back on and come back in. We'll see what we can do with some of these. So there's plenty of time for additional questions if you want. If there's any burning questions, this is your last chance for the next wee while. anyway. So first and foremost, is Katrina back? She's not on my screen, but hopefully we'll get Katrina in a minute. Yep, excellent. Where are we going first? Katrina's just spoken, so we'll start with Tim and go, would a move to an autumn calving system would a move to an outdoor calving system later in the spring have a significant impact on pneumonias and scours?
Yeah, I think it can. I think the we sort of had that stylized image of the shed becoming more and more contaminated, and Katrina nicely showed the stats around it. I think it was 8 times more likely to die in the second half of a 12-week calving than in the first half. And in terms of environmental contamination, particularly around pneumonia, the air quality outdoor and sheltered is very, very hard to beat. But you could put cattle outside and still build up a high environmental challenge if they're highly stocked, if they're in muddy, wet, difficult conditions to keep them clean. So it's not a guarantee, and it would depend a little bit on the quality of the shed and how well we're able to manage the shed through the calving period and what the outdoor option looks like. But it's certainly, it's worth considering. In general, I think that the risk would be lower in that system.
Yeah, I suppose as well, you look at what the rest of the system looks like too, and what's your weaning situation going to be like, and does it mean you're going to be weaning a lot of smaller calves that'll be more vulnerable to pneumonia and stuff down the line? So yeah, horses for courses, I suppose. But good answer, Karen. This one's for you. Tim mentioned about milk yield, so important to keep cows milking and keep energy levels up for calves. If I'm just looking out the window, it's obviously dark now, but outside we've got a pretty hard winter, and I know it's pretty horrendous in some areas. Probably unlikely we're going to be turning out at normal time or an early turnout. How do we keep these cows going in the house if they've post calving? How do we keep these cows milking and ultimately get them back in calf down the line too?
Okay, I think it's important that you meet their needs to milk with an appropriate ration. So getting your silage analysed, making sure you know what quality of forage you're dealing with. Ad lib silage or ad lib forage is always a way to go, but what that needs balance with depends on the quality of the forage. So a poor silage might need 3 or 4 kilos of a concentrate, and a good silage might just need 1 or 2 kilos. So it really depends on the quality of the forage that you're feeding, and making sure that that's accessible, making sure they have enough forage in front of them, not making them clean up really hard if it's not stale food in front of them and these sort of things. So is that what you're looking for, Robert?
Yeah, and I think as Katrina mentioned as well, the kind of importance of changing groups as well, or getting those cows and calves out of the calving group as well, and
yeah, definitely,
as a group of calved cows rather than a group of mixed cows.
Yeah, often, people are often, wait till they've got a batch of cows, but I think I would try and encourage you, as soon as possible to move calved cows out if, when it's possible, into their own group.
Excellent, thanks. Katrina, first one for you. How do we measure if calves are getting enough colostrum? And in fact, that's part A. How do we know that calves are getting enough colostrum into them?
Yeah, so it's a good question. 2 parts. I mean, one part, the first part is kind of easy to answer, and it's just via blood samples. So you can do it between them being about 24 hours old and 7 days of age, and it's just a blood sample, and I would do it from the healthy ones rather than the dehydrated ones, and that will give you a kind of cut-off to say that calf's got enough antibodies in the blood or it hasn't. So that's a relatively kind of cheap and easy ones. In beef calves, obviously it's much more difficult, but there's a couple of things. Is one, do you see it suckling? And actually, I mean, it takes about 20 minutes of good sucking to know that they've probably got a couple of litres. And colostrum quality in beef cows doesn't tend to be such a problem as in dairy cows, but it's provided things like cow condition and things are fine. it's calf vitality as well is quite a strong predictor, because if you get calves that have had a bad calving, they're bruised, they're acidotic, you can get the colostrum into it, but they won't absorb it very well. So actually, even things like looking at how quickly are they sitting up, and if you put 2 fingers in their mouth, are they suckling? Those are really good predictors of, as well as have you calved them, because actually that's a really good predictor as well of are they going to take it, and are they going to absorb it if they do take it. So
excellent. And I think you kind of covered part B, which was going to be, does a low level of scour mean that my colostrum management is good? But
yeah, so it's interesting in that it's always the balance, and you know, what might be all right in terms of colostrum levels on your farm might not be enough on my farm. So sometimes we see farms that sit with kind of suboptimal levels of colostrum, but you know, environmental hygiene is so good that they get away with it until something changes, if that makes sense. If you've got places where there is a high environmental challenge, they will need a higher level to cope with it, if that makes sense. So I wouldn't take it as a given. If your scour levels are low, it might just be that your environmental management is really, really good.
Yeah, excellent. And it's also a thing, you know, I think sometimes you can do absolutely everything right and still end up with a scour situation. It's worth probably highlighting that it's not, try and not beat yourself up about it. It happens,
absolutely.
and it's one of those things. The next one, Alwyn, is on your radar. So looking at disinfectants, is hydrated lime an effective disinfectant? And there's another question asking what is the best disinfectant. So that's a probably more broad question.
Yeah.
But we go to the hydrated lime question first.
Yeah, hydrated lime is okay. I mean, I quite like hydrated lime because of its drying effect, which is and it's quite convenient to use as well, like on top of the bedding. So you know, if you're not able to muck out, you can put a layer of lime underneath and bed on top of that. Lime does have, you know, antibacterial, antiviral, some anti-crypto, although not very good, but it anti properties. So you know, it is a good disinfectant to use. If you're able to, though, I think you're better off, you know, mucking out and disinfect with a more broad spectrum disinfectant. So, and there's a number of them out there, and I've tried to look in the past to see which one's best, but something like FAM 30, you know, it's a good all-round disinfectant to use. If you have had problems with crypto in the past, then it's worth remembering that these disinfectants are not always effective against crypto. So there are other more specific ones to use against crypto and cocci. And I can't remember exactly the names of them, but they're the ones that contain peroxide type disinfectants. And I think we can give a list of names actually afterwards, if that's all right, Robert, of the ones against crypto. But but it's worth thinking about doing that maybe in the summer. You know, if you had problems in the past, and when the sheds are empty in the summer, giving it a good clean, and then giving it once over or twice over with a disinfectant effective against crypto. And then as the season goes on, you know, during calving and stuff, you can use lime as you go along, really, to disinfect the pens. So yeah.
Simple. Thanks, Alan. As a straightforward question here, Katrina, I think it's straightforward, is you mentioned about acidotic calves. Should we, if we're using Lactaid, should we be putting a couple of spoonfuls of bicarb in with the Lactaid?
So
calf, obviously.
Yeah, so I would it depends a little bit on whether or not, you know, that they're at risk of acidosis. So if the, you know, if the scour is pretty mild and you're really starting kind of, you know, from day zero, then you're probably okay. It would probably be better, rather than putting bicarb in, to use, so likes of ephedril would be like a second generation, and it's actually got the bicarb precursor, because I suppose the risk of putting straight bicarb down the throat is that it goes into the rumen as well. So I think it is better to use the bicarb precursor and add something like ephedrine or Life Aid Extra.
Yeah, cool. Excellent. Karen, can we feed red clover silage to suckler cows?
Yes, you can, and there maybe this question is referring to the phytoestrogen content, which has been shown in ewe nutrition to have effects on fertility. So the advice in sheep is not to feed it. I think it's 45 days pre-tupping and post-tupping. I don't think for cattle that's actually been proven, and I think, as far as I know, current guidance was to not feed cows you know, the pure red clover silage or pure red clover forage or grass 45 days either side of bulling. I don't know if the vets have anything to add to that. I think the research is a bit sketchy on cattle with it, but Tim or Alan, do you know?
Nothing to add, actually. No, I don't.
No,
I don't know of any
same.
more specific research, Karen. Sounds
Yeah,
sensible.
I think it's, I mean, so it's red clover silages. It depends if it's pure red clover as well, or whether it's 50% or 25% red clover. So I think the percentage of it as well will make a difference. But I think in cattle it's less problematic than it is in sheep.
For me, coming at it from the business end of things, I would think it's probably it's a very powerful product. You know, it's a really good feed, and it's probably one we should be diverting to more productive animals than suckler cows. You know, it's probably where your stores are, certainly growing cattle should be on. That we need good diets for suckler cows, but I think it could be there could be too much poke in a red clover diet for managing a suckler
And I think
cow.
straight red clover might be a wee bit harder to ensile than a mixture as well. But
yeah. Katrina, non-steroidal anti-inflammatories. You mentioned, you know, how important they are. Can they be overused? And is there an argument that if we've jagged something with antibiotics, it should get a follow-up of Metacam or equivalent at the same time?
I think in terms of pneumonia, probably no, they can't be overused. And yeah, I think if you're treating anything for clinical pneumonia, then it should have a non-steroidal at the same time. Absolutely.
Yeah, perfect. Thanks. Tim, if we're isolating a scouring calf, we know that's really important. Should we isolate a pneumonic calf as well?
Ideally you would, if you can do it easily. Then yeah, the same multiplier effect occurs. It's just down to whether you've got facilities, you know, to be able to do that and do it easily. I think the difference, I suppose, is when that calf's, you know, producing in its into the airway, you know, respiratory droplets and bugs going out there. If you've got a really well ventilated shed, they should be moving out pretty quick. Whereas with a scouring calf, it's there, you know, for a considerable period of time, really until, as Alan's describing, it's mucked out, pressure washed, and an effective disinfectant used. So it's probably slightly less compelling then, but the principle is a good one. It's probably more about the pragmatics of being able to do that, especially, you know, once you're into 10% of the group, 15%, 20% of the group affected. You know, you can no longer do it in any practical way. Becomes the problem, I think.
Yeah, tricky. So this one goes to all vets, and whoever wants to take it can shout first. But
Alan,
there's been Alan, this is yours. We've actually had it a few times. It's questions about Purex. So this is a system basically where you're establishing a safe culture of bugs rather than disinfecting. What's the thoughts? Is that worth doing? It's obviously there's a cost to swabbing sheds and developing that culture. Is it worth doing? And, you know, should we be looking at it? Alan.
I think it's to be used in collaboration with other things, you know. So, you know, in terms of with the principle with most of these diseases is dryness as much as possible, you know, good ventilation, etc., to kind of reduce the ability of these pathogens to survive, you know. So I think, yeah, I think they can help for sure, but I don't think they are the only answer to these questions. But yeah, I see no harm in incorporating them into your systems.
We actually, I'm just going back to some feedback we got from Basil Lohman from webinar number 2, I think it was, about water troughs, and we had mentioned about the importance of washing out, flushing out, pouring out. Obviously, keeping that environment dry is really important, and pouring wet, you know, pouring manky water trough into straw bed isn't quite what we were suggesting. So, as you say, management, keeping things dry would be dry and socially clean would be the priority.
The idea with the water troughs was to not to tip him into the pen itself, you know, to take the water out, whether that's by buckets or whatever. But you know, pouring it into the pen would add an awful lot of water into the bedding and kind of defeat the purpose, really. So, yeah.
Yeah, excellent. Thanks, Alan. Anything to add, anybody? All happy? There's a few more questions to come, so we'll keep it lit just now. There's one actually which is a really good statement, really. It was somebody talking about they had a bad experience for a couple of years with Scours. They started off using IV fluids if they didn't respond to the first therapy, so to a bag, and then the following year when they had a similar problem, basically went straight to IV, you know, at the first instance, and had a good response. So interesting point, but the question really is, the next thing that they were thinking about or being recommended was natural yogurt being put into calves that are scouring. Is it, you know, is there method in the madness here? Is it worth putting natural yogurts back in, putting other
Probiotic,
probiotic, that's the word. Tim.
So, well, I'll just quickly check. I don't have my own clinical experience of that, so I've never prescribed it. It wouldn't be a prescription, but I've never used it myself. So I'll defer to either of the two in case they have, because it's always better.
No, I've had farmers who've kind of sworn by it as well in practice, and that's kind of, I guess, always used alongside fluid therapy and things like that as well. So I'm not sure. I don't have much experience of kind of using it.
Neither do I really, but I think the principle is quite interesting and probably good. You know, there's it needs to be live yogurt if you're going to use it. You know, it has to have the live bacteria in it. So you want to be using that, and you want to be using it alongside the other hydration treatments as well. You know, and it can help add good bacteria, I suppose, to the gut. I
suppose ultimately, what harm can it do? Like, you know, it can only, worst case scenario, it does nothing.
That's right.
Should do better than that.
As long as we don't, it just doesn't have the volume of fluid. That's the harm it can do. If you're giving them, and I don't think anyone's suggesting that, but you give them yogurt and you don't give them the lactaid, then it's harmful because they just don't have the volume of fluid there that they need. So as an add-on and as something else you can try, I think everyone's agreed, but the fluid's certainly more important in a dehydrated calf. It gets that first, and then think about the probiotic afterwards.
Yep, cool, excellent. Katrina, are the seeds of winter pneumonias in weaned calves, are they often sown in the spring? So do we have a wee calf that has a wee pneumonia and then it creates a bigger problem down the line?
I think it certainly can be. So I mean, certainly you can get pneumonias post-weaning that are purely post-weaning, but certainly if a calf's got lung damage before turnout, then that can be quite long lasting, and it can grumble on, but you will get kind of straight pneumonias that occur pre-weaning and calves that post-weaning rather, and calves that were unaffected before turnout.
So we'll not give too much away on that one, because we will cover that in the next in the series. So that's all good. I'm conscious there's 3 more questions I want to cover. It's 1 minute too. So Tim, if we've got navel ill bugs in the shed this year, will those bugs are those bugs potentially going to cause problems next year?
Yeah, absolutely. Navel can be a real problem. It's a bugger when it gets going, but the bugs that cause it are in the shed all the time. Everyone's got navel bugs in the sheds. They're environmental streps and bugs that they just come with the cattle. So we focus on colostrum, navel hygiene, etc. as the major preventatives. But yeah, they'll be there every year. Yeah.
One tiny wee bit of free individual consultancy, if it's possible. Autumn-born calves that were done with Risperdal and Trinazole, they've developed a bark, so there's a few of them coughing. Other than that, absolutely thriving, shining, looking the part. Do they need treated, or will that sort itself out? Anybody? Katrina? There's no warranty on this answer.
Take a temperature, get their temperature.
Yeah, I think I would see, because I mean the thing about calves and the thing that's difficult about early detection is they hide it really well. You know, they're designed to be able to hide these, so they hide it really well. I would certainly be taking a few temperatures and having a chat with your vet, because I guess you don't want things grumbling along and ending up with a bigger problem and secondary bacterial infections and things coming in on top of them.
Yeah, they might have a low mild pneumonia or something, a mild chronic pneumonia going on or something. So.
Mm-hmm. And I suppose for all calves, we shouldn't really be jagging, or certainly pneumonia, we shouldn't be jagging anything until we know, reach for the thermometer before the syringe.
Yeah.
Not a vet, sorry, putting words in your mouth.
Absolutely, yeah.
How long final question, and it's one that actually came up in the colostrum section too. How long can we keep colostrum in the freezer for? So if you've got some, we froze some last year, is it still good to use, or do IgG levels reduce? Anybody? Alwyn?
I might defer to Katrina if that's okay. I think Katrina might be better at this than me.
I mean, usually advice is 6 months, but I don't know kind of after that how quickly it goes down, or how much it does go down. You can get, and certainly the colostrometers that you can stick in it and see how it's doing. But if you get the opportunity to get fresher colostrum this year, then I would use it. But if if what you've got from last year is what you've got, it's certainly going to be better than nothing.
The other thing to add there is, like, when you are defrosting colostrum, is to defrost it slowly, or do it slowly in warm water, I suppose, but not in boiling water and not in the microwave, because you want to defrost it slowly so you preserve the antibodies. Because if you do it too quickly or use microwave, you're going to damage the antibodies.
And what if we don't freeze it? So if it's sitting just in the fridge, so in the middle of calving, how long is that bad practice? How long can we sit on a jug of colostrum?
It depends a bit on how cleanly it's collected. So one of the things we know is that things like salmonella really like being in milk, so they proliferate really quickly. So quite often, even after sort of 2 or 3 days, bacterial counts will be really high. You can get things like potassium sorbate tablets that you can stick in it, and that will last a little bit longer, but certainly not any longer than 2 or 3 days, and it has to be collected cleanly in the first place for that to be okay.
Yeah, excellent. So we have had a really good session there, loads of questions. There's a few again we haven't got answered. We are working, we'll have the answers to all the previous questions and these ones out to you very soon, and we'll also send out copies of all the slides. The webinars are all recorded, so you can go back on the links that we've been on and basically rewatch the whole thing again if there's points you missed or things you want to catch up on, or even whole webinars you missed if you want to go back and have a catch up. So those certainly a big thanks to Katrina for coming along today. A really, really useful session, and hopefully food for thought for dealing with minor problems rather than dealing with massive outbreaks and massive issues, but certainly useful food for thought from today's session. And also, just at this stage, I just want to thank everybody. We've had a really good support for the first 5 webinars. We've had over 100 people at every one, and I'm really, really pleased with that, and I'm really pleased that we're getting good messages out, and hopefully all I'm interested in is that you guys go out there and actually can apply some of this and have a good calving, have a successful calving. Obviously, we don't know what's round the corner weather-wise and things, but hopefully there's been some good messages here that will help and assist throughout your own calving. So with that, I just really want to again thank everybody for being involved and wish you all a very good evening, except for I've forgotten, there is no such thing as a free lunch. We didn't give you a free lunch anyway, but you have, while you've been watching this, I've been sent a feedback form which actually covers all the webinars. So it's just a survey monkey. It's only 10 questions. It's only tick a few boxes, so it shouldn't take long. And we'd be really grateful for your feedback. And I don't just mean the good feedback. If there's things that we could do better, we would really like to hear that, because we're really wanting to. Hopefully, we can run these in future years as well, and certainly improve the meetings in the back end as well. So please give us your feedback, and if there's any more feedback or anything else you want to say to me, please feel free to give me an email or a phone at some point. Certainly happy to talk about this. So with that, this time I just want to thank everybody again and wish you all a good evening and a successful calving.